I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the Marriage Initiative, and I am so happy to introduce you to Greg Schutte today. Greg's the director of Marriage Works Ohio, which is under the umbrella of the Elizabeth New Life Pregnancy Resource Center. He's the author of Catholic Marriage Programs, Discovering Our Deepest Desire, and Building Eucharistic Marriage, as well as an ecumenical counterpart, Rekindling the Heart. Greg's been a licensed therapist for more than 30 years, focusing on marriage and family for the past 20. Greg, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so glad to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, tell us about Marriage Works Ohio. I just love that it's part of a pregnancy resource center, that they had the wisdom to add marriage support as one of their foundational programs. That's not something I've heard before, but marriage resource centers are near and dear to my heart. I've volunteered at one in the past and still support. So I love that pathway.
Yeah, so it's back in, I don't even want to try and figure out the date, almost 35 years ago. The executive director who founded the Elizabeth New Life Center to really help women who were in crisis and to save babies from abortion started to realize that there was a bigger picture here that we really needed to deal with. And so from there, she started to implement some programs to really go into high schools and help kids make better decisions around dating and saving sex for marriage. And then in 2006, she saw this need to really help the whole family, because it's like this is where we're struggling, is with the whole breakdown of the family. And back in 2006, the Elizabeth New Life Center applied for one of the federal Healthy Marriage grants. And we got one of the 3 largest in the United States. So it was awesome, but it was overwhelming because, a lot of programming we had to build at that point. So I was hired on in 2006 to really be the director over programming. And that's where I was picking, what curriculums we were using. And there was a lot of good ones out there. And so, yeah, since that time, under the whole Marriage Works department, we've not only worked with the youth aspect and going into high schools and really helping that arena. We're also helping couples through marriage education through classes. In 2009, I had a priest friend of mine ask if I would actually do therapy for couples. Yeah. And that was my background before I came here, was as a therapist. And I said, well, sure. I decided to take on 1 or 2, and then before I knew it, it exploded into a lot of couples that have needed that, understandably so. And then we also have done a lot with online marriage enrichment. So, yeah, since that whole time, the Elizabeth New Life Center is really trying to do this. How do we help families and individuals at all stages to really have a healthy family unit and that healthy growth?
Well, and I love that you talked about how you started counseling. You started working with the parish and some of the priests that were friends of yours, and they knew they wanted to send couples to you because they knew they could trust your worldview, your perspective, that you would counsel from a Christian, and your background is Catholic, but they knew they could trust your perspective and safely give the couples to you. And you saw quite a few things while you were counseling. And then too, you had your own journey in your experience with your own family, your lovely wife, Stephanie, and your 7 children. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how that all of this came together and resulted in some of the offerings that you subsequently have now.
Sure. So going even further back, before I started working here, 10 years into my own marriage, I had my own marital crisis. And me and my wife, because at the time we had 4 kids.
Yeah.
So now we have 7.
Just to start.
I know.
I stopped at 2. 2 was two boys. That was my limit.
Oh, I know. We hear it all the time. Neighbors, they'll hop over the fence and they'll be like, how do you afford all those kids? And then the jokes fly at that point. But ultimately, 4 children in, it was one of these where it's something that I see in a lot of clients that I counsel, which is this divide and conquer.
Yeah.
We got so much into all of these things that we had to do, and we had a heart for being the best that we could, but we lost sight of each other. We weren't taking that time to really talk, connect, and that's where all this, what I call filling in the blanks, started to happen, and we started to think the worst of each other. And again, I see that a lot in couples that I counsel, and in the midst of that, we kind of had that come to Jesus moment where, I had to just face things with her and say, what's going on here? What's going to happen? And it's that moment where a lot of couples face where it's like, you can either start arguing who's more wrong or, who's done what. But through the grace of God, I answered her when she was telling me these things with, yes, you're right. I need to figure this out. And so we both started a journey of going inside of ourselves and really working through this. And we've come out on the other side. Yes. Great. But when God called me into this whole ministry with the Elizabeth New Life Center and building Marriage Works Ohio, that became something that I could really pull from is my own healing story. And when my supervisor gave me the option, because under the grants, we were just strictly doing things to meet grant goals. We were, we would run the programs. I would do therapy sometimes, but when I really was able to dig in and do more of a Christian based, or the first one was really Catholic based, because when I looked in our diocese at the time for something that was being provided for marriage enrichment, not marriage prep,
right,
but marriage enrichment, I couldn't find anything. And if it was there, it was well hidden.
Yeah.
So she allowed me to put together a program called, and I called it Discovering Our Deepest Desire, or DOD for short. And in that, it's built off of a therapeutic model for change, helping couples therapeutically walk through each of these, issues. But it's 12 sessions. And the goal is to, what we found successful in Marriage Works is not just a weekend program, but something that got couples into this habit of making time for each other.
Yeah.
And so that was key. And then, everything that I really put into my own marital healing went into this program.
Tell me, when you say therapeutic model, it sounds very interesting, but I'm not sure that even me or my marriage champions, could you unpack that for us and tell us exactly what that means?
Sure. So, I think that there's the opportunity where we can just take different aspects of marriage and just kind of talk about them, and that can be very helpful to people. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But when I talk about therapeutic model, it's built off of one where from start to finish, it's kind of how you would walk through or deal with any problem, and not specifically as much as more globally. And I'll explain that in a minute. But it's also a skills-based program where couples who are going through it, they're learning, but they're also given skills to put into practice. Mm-hmm. And so this is more built off of what's called a cognitive behavioral model. And just in layman's terms, the best way to put it, the best way to put it is, when I'm trying to make a change in my life, sometimes it can be inspired by, I hear something, I read something, and I'm inspired, like, yes, this is right. I want to do this. I'm going to do this. So the cognitive part leads, hopefully, my behaviors to change. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of times people going through classes, or people that are struggling even being there. Sometimes you'll see a spouse drag their spouse into therapy or into the class. So if you can get them working on a skill in changing the behavior, mm-hmm. and they have success with that, then there's this opportunity for their thinking to change. Oh, wow, it worked. She's listening to me. We're having great conversation. and then there's that hope. So it's kind of it can work both ways.
Okay. Well, and you said too that sometimes people would come and they say, I can't, we need help with communication. And that's like, that's a big pain point. People will come in, but you said that's not usually where you start, right? That's maybe it's something that it's a felt need, but it's not really the foundational starting point.
Right. And that's something that, again, little by little, as I was putting together the curriculum and even thinking about my own therapy, is that, sometimes you work with people with a better communication style or a better communication tool. But if there's foundational things that are undermining that, then you're going to have a harder time helping them with that communication. And the first one that I find is the biggest issue is time. People don't have or are giving enough time to their marriage. And I emphatically usually say at classes, there's no substitute for time in building, maintaining, or rebuilding a marriage.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have time for each other, you can't even practice the tool that you've been given.
Yeah.
And people don't fall out of love first, they fall out of knowing each other because we're too busy. And then what I see happening in relationships is we lose sight of the emotional bond, the emotional um, connection that we have in the needs, and it becomes heavier on our functional relationship. Did you get this done? Did you do this? And then we start to fuss and fight about why did it 10 times, you only did it 2. And now we start the comparing thing versus are both of these needs being met at the same time? So
Well, and you talk about that, those needs, what you use a really interesting word picture of feeding and starving. Could you unpack that? Because I really liked how you said that.
yeah, that was something that kind of hit me. This is where I love inviting God into anything that I do, because so often, you find yourself going into therapy with couples and you have no idea what you're going to get. You have no idea what they're going to throw at you. And I've seen doozies where I'm thinking, is candid camera on here, because this is crazy. But through the grace of God, earlier on when I was doing therapy, I kept dealing with this blame game where people kept going back and forth. She did, she didn't do, he did, he didn't do. And this one time they were going back and the lady said, back on our wedding day. And I'm like, hold on, time out.
Wow,
They
this
had
is
been married a long time. And through the grace of God, I asked them one question that really has been something that I pull from in working with certain couples. Is I asked them, if I gave you the opportunity to starve each other to death, would you do it?
yeah,
And often they look at me like, we're paying you for what?
yeah.
And I'm like, no, 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 no. Just answer this question. And most of them, I should say all of them, there was one couple where the lady paused.
Ah,
Her husband was like
I hope there's
very
no-
overweight. And I'm like, no, 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 hold on. But they all say, no, we wouldn't do that. And when I ask why, well, it's mean. I still love them. I wouldn't do that to any human being, whatever it might be. And then I followed it up with, but that's exactly what's happening here. You get into marriage to be each other's helpmates, and you can't help each other get needs met unless you know what their emotional needs are. So this idea of feeding has kind of been part of the way I talk to people, because they can conceptualize, I know what it means to starve or to be hungry. And it makes sense then if in my marriage I don't feel fulfilled, I don't feel like my spouse cares for me, then there is this emotional hunger.
Yeah,
And so if people can conceptualize things in therapy, then you can really help them to change the pattern. And
yeah.
that's all I'm trying to do through the course and through even therapy, is come up with better ways for people. And I mean, look to Jesus. Jesus really, you listen to his parables and you're like, that makes sense. So it's just kind of following that same vein.
Well, and so you started with the Discovering Our Deepest Desire program with the 12 sessions that, again, you said they're kind of that evidence-based and have skills. And then you decided to really boil it down a little more. And like you said, inviting God into the package and boil it down. Let's talk about you're building a Eucharistic marriage.
Okay. Yeah. This was born out of, actually, it was born out of some trauma or traumatic times here at Marriage Works, because, grants had gone away, and my staff that I had a huge staff, really dwindled down. And so there was a rebuilding point that we had to do over time. And in that, there was this, as I was trying to do more of the Discovering Our Deepest Desire course, there was always this pushback of, 12 sessions, that's way too long. It's way too long. Even though in the past, we've done some courses that were 18 weeks long.
Wow.
And when couples invest in it, at the end of it, they most always are saying, what else do you have? Because when you're falling back in love, you want that. So I decided, let's grab some key components out of the 12. Let's make a shorter version, see if that can get some legs, and then we can use the other stuff as kind of add-ons. Well, as I started to pull out 7 key areas that we were going to work on in marriage, I started to connect this, 7 areas that we are called to also grow in our relationship with God.
Yeah.
And especially it made sense to me through the Catholic Mass, because there's this relationship that we're trying to build there. And so that's where this whole building a Eucharistic marriage came out of. First, that whole God feeds us.
Yeah.
And we are called to go and feed one another, starting with our beloved, who we've promised, to be true to walk this journey with. And in marriage, that's our vocation in life towards holiness. And so we are called in marriage not only to be Christ to one another, but to represent Christ's love for his church to the world. And think of how bad it looks right now with the state of marriage. So as we go through this program, we go through these 7 key areas to grow in marriage. And then we also talk about how that plays out in our relationship with Christ. I'm going to be starting a new class on that tonight. So.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
And so you started that, and then you expanded a little bit, because you realized that although you were originally teaching, whether it was in Ohio, but you were teaching originally to the Catholic audience, but then you wanted to really make this understandable and accessible to a more ecumenical audience. So let's talk about that, because our marriage champions could be both, either
Right.
or. And so we won't want to leave anyone out of the party.
No, I thank you. Again, when I originally wrote it, it was because I saw a vacuum in that one area, and it being my background made it a lot easier. But then I had people come to me and say, well, we like the concepts here. Can you write it for other denominations? I thought, sure, because it's not really supposed to be a Bible study. It brings in, different concepts to help the whole program. So these same marriage concepts to strengthen your marriage, then we took a lot of the Catholic doctrine and Catholic pieces to the program, which wasn't a whole bunch, and again, filled with scripture and all of that, made that ecumenical one called Rekindling the Heart. And that's, again, that's the 12-week, and then the 7-week, which I'm getting ready to talk on, connects it with the Road to Emmaus, where it's that walk together, and we encounter Christ in our relationship, and how does that affect our lives. So as we're building that relationship with others, are we doing that with Christ too? So
I just love that. It's kind of a 2-for-1. You're building each other, and as you're inviting the presence of the Holy Spirit, of course, to work in your marriage, it's transformational. It's not just 1 + 1 = 2. It exponentiates when you invite the presence of the Lord. So
and I think so many people that, and this coming from the Catholic and that Christian background is, I know the power of healing that happens when faith is there, or when people actually rediscover faith that was missing. I just recently had this with a couple where there was a deep issue with infidelity. And, they were a couple of faith, had a faith background, but the husband really just lost that. Really, that just was kind of a blocked out of his life, or he minimized it. He would go to church. And when we started to work through the healing and all of that and talking about, he said, the one thing that you said to me, Greg, really started me to think more about my faith. He said the healing is all about the end game. It's about, getting our souls right and then loving one another out of that love for God. And so he really started this journey of deepening his faith as he was working on his marriage. And he said, it was like waking up, like I'd been asleep all these many years, and I was waking up to the beauty of God that I had been neglecting and the beauty of my wife who I'd been neglecting. And so it's just been so neat to see that journey in them and really, finding that healing. So.
Well, I love that you're talking about healing and renewing, because as you were developing, especially the building the Eucharistic marriage and the rekindling your heart, you started incorporating some of the stories, whether they be your stories or stories of others. But there's one story that you and your wife tell that about the healing that you all did, and how those times of hurt are not even remembered anymore, that it's just, and that the concept that when a couple goes through healing, that they can truly almost forget the hurt. I don't know that I've heard a lot of people address that much forgiveness and healing can actually happen, that the hurts from the past can be forgotten. Could you share a little bit of that with our marriage champions?
Yeah, that's where I usually say I think most of my success comes from what I've learned from my wife.
Yeah.
She's, and people are like, well, she should come and join you in therapy. And my wife's like, no, I'd be that therapist that would be like, stop it,
Yeah.
But anyway, it was one of those where so many people get caught up in not wanting to forgive.
Yeah.
And I get it. We hurt so much. And this is the deepest of relationships. You're seeing into my heart, I'm seeing into your heart, and you feel protected. And when that's betrayed or hurt, it's hard, but we can't move forward without forgiveness. And so I often tell my own story of where my marriage broke and how we found healing and all of that. And we were teaching a class, me and my wife, at one point, and I told this, and my wife said to the class, for just some reason, she says, I don't know why he keeps bringing that up. I don't think about it anymore.
Yeah.
And there was this kind of collective, what? Especially from the women saying, what? Explain that, because that doesn't make sense to us. And I'm looking at her like, yeah, this is a new one to me. Fill me in on this.
Great.
I know. And she said, look, we're not the same people. We saw the problem. We took that journey inside of ourselves and really worked to change ourselves for the sake of our marriage. And because we did that work and continue to do that work, she said, he's not the same person. I'm not the same person. There's this natural tendency to just not focus on that and don't think about it. She said, if I want to, I can bring it up. I could think about it. And even draw in those feelings. But when there's that change, there's this natural tendency to just let that go because we're moving in a new trajectory. And so when I use that a lot with couples to help them understand, you can keep stuck in the past. You can keep bringing up all of this stuff and throw it at each other all the time. And the world will tell you you have every right to. But that's not going to help you.
Yeah.
If we can take that and learn from it and change the pattern, then you can move forward, have successes, and there's this natural tendency to not be focused on that and being stuck. And I think that that's such a beautiful thing. And the other thing that my wife said as we were recording, which just kind of hit me, I hadn't thought of. She said, I don't know at what point we stop thinking the best of each other.
Yeah.
And I see that so often in couples where we're starting to argue and fuss and fight, and we're not resolving because we're not taking the time to truly listen. And so we just start thinking, you're doing this because you're mean, you hate me, you don't, whatever it might be. And so I even, do not activity, but a little walkthrough with them to really look at, is your motive just to really hate them? It's like, no, I just want the best. So
Yeah.
it's not the motive, it's how you're doing it
Yeah.
that's wrong. If we can change that, and I think that that's what gives people hope, is that
Yes.
we get stuck in this, I call it the mouse wheel. We're just going round and round and round and round. We don't know how to stop it. And we get in the blame game. And when I tell people we're not going to get into the blame game, because you'll be here for years paying me lots of money and we'll get nowhere. But let's look at the patterns, because we can change patterns. You can't change past. You can't, but you can take that pattern that doesn't work and make it different. And that's when people really want to make that change, they can do it. And I think that that's one of the critical thing in doing therapy, is giving people hope, because
Yes.
people come in and they just have lost all hope that there's anything that's good that's ever going to come out of this. So
I love that you mentioned the word hope, because when you were describing that the situation with you and Stephanie, and how she said, really it's healed. It's not like a thorn in your palm anymore. That's having pus and still painful. It's healed. And that was the word that was coming to me, was hope. What a hopeful message. Now, Greg,
yeah,
not everyone can get to Ohio. And so you solved that problem. And especially back during the pandemic, people couldn't even get in Ohio. I mean, even the people in Ohio couldn't get to you. So you guys came up with a video series. And at
yeah.
first you were skeptical, but talk about your video series, because that's something that people can get. They can get, I think, for themselves, and they can get through their parish or their church, correct? So let's talk about it real quick, and then talk about how they can get a hold of your great resources.
Sure. So we had gotten a donor back at that time that really wanted to invest in the whole marriage program. Now his background is Catholic, and so he really funded that whole
Right.
realm of things. So we made a video series of the Building Eucharistic Marriage course, because we teach it here, and like you said, it was kind of getting bottlenecked here. People wanted it, and we couldn't get it out. So we put this together with Blackstone Films. So we got a great company that came in and helped us, and Revived Parishes that helped us with the promoting of it. But the beauty of it is my wife joined me on this, because when I teach classes, a lot of times it's by myself since she homeschools. But she joined me since it's our story, and it starts with her and I talking about how we kind of mess things up in a particular area. Then it goes into me teaching, and then there's the religious component where a priest comes in and talks, and then it back to me and Stephanie to kind of sum up how we've changed that.
Yeah.
And whenever people watch the series, I think they like my wife more than me. I think they like the priest and my wife more than me, but that's fine.
Oh,
Anyway, so we've got this now. It's a 7-course online video series called Building Eucharistic Marriage. You can find it at eucharisticmarriage.org. We've tried to keep the cost way down. I mean, for almost 7 hours of content, it's less than $60. And there's a lot of dioceses that are supporting this, so people can actually get discounts off of that.
yeah.
So there's that. So if couples are unwilling to go to any type of class, you can still do it in your home.
Yeah.
And it comes with a couples guide and all the videos and all that you would need. But we're also trying to get parishes to
Yes.
do this. So the parish can buy a parish license, which gives them unlimited access to downloading the couples guides. There's a leader's guide. And we're trying to encourage more churches to purchase that and run it as a group.
Yeah.
Because again, I think too many people want to run to therapy quickly. And a lot of this stuff can really be addressed sometimes in classes, not the deeper stuff, but the nice thing about being in a class is you start to realize you're not alone.
Right.
And that's the beauty. So again, I like teaching this live because there's this Q&A, we can wrestle with things. I thought, is a video series really going to make that big of a difference? But okay, it's out there. And little by little, I keep hearing more and more stories of people saying this has transformed us. It's done this. And I've heard several people that have said or have stated that people in their class have said this is what saved them from moving towards divorce.
Yeah.
So this is where I'm just like, praise God. That's whatever it takes, because there's such a crisis today that I'm just happy to be doing my part in all of this. So
Well, it sounds like a wonderful resource, and I'm so glad that people can get it individually. Churches can get it, parishes can get it, and the more people that can avail themselves of good, solid teaching that's based on the Word of God. I mean, like I said, it's a 2-for-1, and it's a great resource. Greg, thank you so much for this valuable information. It was just wonderful to get to talk to you.
my pleasure. It's been I enjoyed talking to you both times that we connected. So this has been great. And I
Oh.
love what you guys are doing with the whole marriage initiative too. So
Well, I think we're aligned in heart and goal. So, Marriage Champions, if you'd like to learn more about Greg and Marriage Works Ohio, find us at marriageresources.org or marriageinitiative.org.